loneliness being this odd feeling that's uncomfortable to actually the full brevity of loneliness. And it needs to happen. It needs to happen because that's what drives us to remedy our feelings. Even though we might label them as bad, they drive us to make changes if dealt with in a healthy manner. Loneliness is not a bad emotion. It could be an indicator that you need to make some changes.
Hello and welcome back to A Safe Place to Land. My name is Emily and I am your host today. I'm going to be joined by Miss Rita Bliven, and she's going to discuss her experience with growing up as an avoidantly attached child and how that's translated into her adult relationships and her healing journey. Miss Rita is a lovely young woman who was able to get into therapy at a very young age and build self-awareness and gain support and make huge leaps and bounds in her healing journey. She has written a book called Canyons and Fireworks, which she will discuss at the end of the episode. So stay tuned to learn more about living with an avoidant attachment style as we destigmatize what it means to have an insecure attachment and how to develop coping skills to seek growth and healing. Without further ado, here we go. Hello, everybody. I'm Emily, and I'm here with Miss Rita Bliven. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about her story and her journey with healing her avoidant attachment. And so we're just going to go ahead and jump in. So, Rita, tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got here.
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for having me on. You are so warm and welcoming, and I feel like this is just going to go very smoothly. So Thank you for having me on. But to answer your question a little bit about me, the main thing about me is that I had an extreme avoidant attachment style. And back in the 90s, we actually called it a disorder. That language has since changed. But the reason I had such an extreme attachment style was because when I was a baby, my dad took me to Mexico and I lived with him for 2 years. And it was during the attachment forming time from the time I was a baby until I was about 3 years old. I lived with my father, bonded with his big Mexican family, learned Spanish as my first language. And then when I was 3 years old, my mom got me back and took me to the States, to her hometown in Western Pennsylvania, and none of her family spoke Spanish. And I definitely look more Mexican than my mom. And so my first memories are of being in a new country, surrounded by a new family that didn't speak my language. As you can imagine, my attachment never fully developed and was disrupted a lot. And so I had trouble trusting others. I feared intimacy, and I really lacked a sense of self, which I think is often overlooked when we talk about attachment. It's not just about relationships with others. It's also about your relationship with yourself.
Yes. Yeah. I completely agree. That sense of identity and safety to explore the world is so important during your development. And it sounds like that was really difficult for you with the language barrier and everything changing.
100%. Yes, it was very difficult. And of course, a child doesn't understand it all. But to my mother's credit, she got me in professional counseling, professional Christian counseling, when I was very young, like 13 or 14 years old. And so that is how I was given language to what I was going through with the attachment issues.
How old were you when you started seeking counseling?
About 13 or 14 years old.
Yep. Wow. Yeah.
Like I said, to my mother's credit, it wasn't my doing, it was my mother's. And that was pretty progressive in the 90s.
Right. Yeah.
So I give her a lot of credit for getting me in counseling. And then also just the financial sacrifice. My mom is a teacher, so she didn't have an overabundance of extra funds, but she saw the need and made it a priority.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I'm so glad that you had that opportunity. Now, were you showing signs as a child that you were struggling with relationships, and that's kind of why she took that initiative?
That's not exactly why she took the initiative. She took the initiative because a cousin of mine his parents were going through a really, really bad divorce, and he was acting out. And I think the court system recommended counseling for my cousin, and it helped him so much that my mom and aunts just thought it was a great idea that we would all go to counseling. And we pretty much all did, but I'm the one who stayed in counseling because I was the one that had this big attachment issue because my siblings didn't have the same situation as I did. And so it started kind of as a fluke and then just turned out to be the best thing for me. But yes, my earliest memories are almost all linked to some sort of attachment issue. So yeah, I was definitely displaying all the signs and was probably a pretty easy diagnosis for my counselor.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit what those signs were for you because, many of our listeners are still trying to figure out what attachment is and if it's showing up for them in their relationships.
So I think it's important to understand that even though I was 3 years old when I got back with my mom and her side of the family, I consciously knew that they were my family, but I wasn't bonded to them.
Mm.
And so even though as I grew up more, I bonded with them some, I didn't have the normal bonding time that a child has when they're in a family. And so I innately didn't trust my family. Now, if you would have asked me, are you going to get in this car and your aunt's going to take you to the grocery store? Do you trust her?
Right.
I, of course, would have said, of course I trust her because I did. And I did get in the car and go with my aunt to the grocery store, to the zoo or whatever. So it wasn't not trusting with my life. It was not trusting enough to open up and be myself and relax. I was always on edge. I was always, in survival mode. Even though I was in a loving family, that is my biological family.
Right.
I just didn't ever relax or trust or let anyone in.
Yeah, and I hear that so often with people when they look at other people's situations and they're like, "Oh, well, I had my needs met and my parents were married, and so why am I struggling?" But you can have, that safe environment physically, but you might not have that safe environment emotionally.
Yes.
And that can be
Yes.
really difficult because feeling seen and heard and loved and understood and having that freedom to explore yourself and your personality is so important during those developmental years.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
hmm
Yeah.
I love what you said about, well, my needs were met and it was a loving family. And I think as a society, we've kind of it's well known now that kids who are abused or neglected are going to have issues.
Mhm.
But the one component that is so often overlooked is separation.
Mhm.
You know, attachment theory says you have to have a loving, responsive, consistent caregiver. And that can be physically separated. But physical separation can cause a problem as well as emotional
Mhm.
separation.
Mhm.
And we have all of these parents that have to work, two income families. And there is just a natural physical and emotional separation
Mhm.
that takes place in the average healthy home.
Right.
And I don't think we give enough honor to the effect that has, or validation maybe is the right word.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think that's like a big message that I'm trying to like get across, like as a counselor, is just that connection with your children, that one on one time, that intimacy is just so important for their development.
Mm-hmm.
And we also don't want to knock mothers. Like, we know that this is hard, we
No.
know that there's so much going on.
Mm-hmm.
And so, valuing that intimate time with your children and exploring their emotions and being emotionally present as well and making sure you have your support system so you can be there because it is so difficult and sometimes shutting off and shutting down is the only way to get through the day and get through the motions.
Mm-hmm.
Um but like you said, that consistency is so important. Yeah, definitely. So tell us a little bit about your journey as you started developing your adult relationships and dating. What did that look like for you as someone who leaned more avoidant?
Terrible. It was terrible. It was horrible.
Definitely.
It was absolutely horrible. So I think what's interesting is that people with avoidant attachment still get lonely.
Mhm.
I think there's a misconception that people who are avoidant just don't have feelings and just don't need relationship. And that is not true.
So far
Avoidant,
from the truth.
it's so far from the truth. We still need relationships. We just fear intimacy.
That's right.
And so in hindsight, I look back at my, 20s as being hyper independent, feeling like I didn't need a relationship,
Mhm.
and then getting lonely, and then seeking a relationship out, and of course, getting a relationship of some sort, and then being afraid of intimacy and it just never really developing into a meaningful relationship
Mm.
and pushing people away. I was a ghoster before the term was ever,
Oof.
commonplace. I was
Yeah.
definitely a ghoster. I definitely nitpicked my
Mhm.
significant other and
Mhm.
always found a reason to push them away. Of
Mm.
course, none of this was conscious, but in hindsight, it's all so abundantly clear.
So clear.
So clear in hindsight, yes.
Yeah, I mean, your self-awareness is amazing, and I feel like I'm, like, inside of an avoidance brain right now, and I love this so much. But, yeah, I tell people all the time, avoidance still want relationships
Mhm.
because they're human at the end of the day,
Mhm.
and connection is just essential. They might not walk like it and talk like it, but deep down they want it, and they might not
Yep.
even realize it, that they're
Mhm.
lonely at the time.
If you are picking up what we're putting down, we would love it if you could drop us a review wherever you're listening and subscribe. It helps other folks find us and helps us spread the word that it is okay to not be okay. All right, enough about this. Let's get back to the show.
Yeah, I think lonely is a word I would have never used.
Mhm.
When I was in the height of my avoidant attachment, I would never have described myself as lonely. But in hindsight, it's abundantly clear to me that a lot of times I was reacting out of loneliness, but it was somewhat foreign to me.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's kind of like I've heard people say when they're going through a divorce, I don't love him or her anymore, but there's still an odd connection. And they can't quite call it love. They can't quite call it hate or, whatever. Loneliness is like that for an avoidant. It's like not you're normal, but you would never call it lonely. You would,
That would be vulnerable for you to say that.
it would be vulnerable, but also I don't think it's the same loneliness that securely
Sure.
attached people have. It's
Okay.
sort of like an odd feeling, like something is off and
Mm.
I'm ready to be social now. It's not the wow, I'm really lonely. I'm alone. I go to work, I come home, I'm alone. It's not like that.
Mhm.
It's a little different.
A little unfamiliar, kinda just like this longing for something, but you don't really know what it is because it's
Yes.
never been something that you've had before.
Yes.
That's really interesting, but also really sad.
It is very sad. And I talk about it in my book when I don't consider myself completely healed, completely recovered. It's a lifelong journey,
Mhm.
but I am on the other side of it,
Mhm.
by and large.
Mhm.
And I talk about, when I had some major milestones, it was like the loneliness of my entire life came crashing down on me
Wow.
because I had actually experienced deep connection.
Mm.
And then the result of that was fully experiencing loneliness and isolation and fully realizing just how lonely I had been and experiencing it in a different way, which sounds super sad. And it was, but it's a step in an avoidance recovery, I
Mhm.
think, is when you transition from loneliness being this odd feeling that's uncomfortable to actually the full brevity of loneliness.
Mm.
And it needs to happen. It needs to happen because that's what drives us to remedy our feelings.
Mm.
Even though we might label them as bad, they drive us to make changes
Right.
if dealt with in a healthy manner.
Right.
And so loneliness is not a bad emotion. It could be an indicator that you need to make some changes and seek relationship. And an avoidant doesn't fully feel it, and so they don't fully seek a remedy.
Right. Right. And they stay in that pattern of distance, keeping people at arm's length. And we all have to feel our emotions to heal our emotions.
Yes.
Never know what is actually going on inside of us until we open that door.
Yep.
And that can
The
be so
Pandora's box.
scary. I know, I know. And it's scary and it's difficult, but to really make those lasting changes, we're going to have to open that door and it's going to hurt, but the healing on the other side is just so beautiful. And I'm just
So worth it.
it's so worth it. It's so
so
worth
worth
it
it.
every time. Yeah, that's awesome. And so, where are you at in terms of relationships now?
So I'm happily married and I have a beautiful stepdaughter. And I did not get married until I was 37. So that is late. And people ask me all the time. And I always say, well, there's a number of reasons, but mainly because I was avoidant. That's great dinner talk. People just love hearing that. But it's just the truth. I was struggling with avoidant attachment all throughout my 20s for sure. And then in my 30s is when I really started to have some breakthrough. And then you don't get married or have a great relationship right away. It takes a little bit of time. So it was worth it. I wish I could have gotten more healing earlier, but I love my life. I love my husband. I love our home. I love the time we spend together. So it all worked out.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm so happy to hear that. And I think it provides so much hope and light for the future because, attachment insecurity is so common and I'm so glad it's being talked about more. With that being said, just the ability to grow in your relationships and have that happiness and love and connection is just it's a great thing to see. And so when you were exploring, serious relationships, what were like the biggest hurdles for you?
So the biggest hurdle for me was that there was a progression that had to take place that was completely different than what I thought. You make it through life into your 20s, and as an avoidant, you're probably thriving in your career and, independent, you have friends, and you're ready to date. And for me, I actually went back to Mexico and reconnected with my father and his side of the family. And I didn't know that I was healing my attachment issue and doing that. It just so happens that they reached out to me, and I always wanted to reconnect with them because when I was 3 years old and my mom got me back, she changed my name and severed all ties with my father and his side of the family because she never wanted him to take me to Mexico
Wow.
again. And so it was an extreme cutoff. And I went back to Mexico and reconnected with my father and his family. And it was almost like going back to my toddler years and forming that secure attachment that should have been formed then. And I felt so connected
Wow.
that my mom's side of the family, their investment in my life just came to fruition. Once I connected with my father, I instantly felt bonded with my mom's side of the family. And I thought, great, I'm healed.
I wish it was that easy.
I'm on the other side of it. And I didn't realize, well, then I needed to kind of go back to adolescence and form outside of the family friendships and connections, which I had a ton of friends. Avoidants are very likable. They know how to be likable. They have friends, but I didn't have those intimate friendships. And so after I connected with my dad and felt connected to my mom's side of the family, I then had to develop intimate friendships. And in those intimate friendships, I began to, my real personality began to come out. I was a late bloomer, let's put it that way.
Right.
In my early 30s, I went through kind of what most people go through during the college years, where they're having their adult friends that are probably going to be there when they get married and are probably, going to be the best man.
Lasting friendships, yeah.
Yeah, not the elementary school or high school, friendships, but the college friendships. And, people usually come out of their shell a little bit in college, and that developmental stage of leaving the nest, but yet being old enough and prepared to leave the nest. I really went through that in my early 30s.
Wow.
Because I had to have secure attachment with my family.
To go out and explore.
So even though I was independent, supporting myself and all of that, I wasn't fully developed until, about 32 or 33. And then I started to have really like a purpose in my career, as opposed to just being successful and making money and being independent. But I started to enjoy the connections, not on the same deep level as I was with my family and friends, but the connections that were appropriate within my career, to not just go to work and, put your nose to the grindstone, but really connect with people on that level as well. And then after a few years, I was just sort of ready for marriage, because if I would have gotten married in my 20s, I wasn't a fully developed person yet. In hindsight, it's beautiful, but while I was going through it, it was confusing that I expected for things to progress differently.
Right. Were you kind of questioning, like, why not me? Why can't I get things right? I look around at all my other friends and it just comes so easy to them. Why is this so hard for me? Did you ever have those kind of questions?
In my case, not really, because I was in counseling, because I knew what happened to me when I was little, and because I was in counseling, and counseling informed me, I was trauma informed that this would have ripple effects. And then I saw the ripple effects in my life. So it was kind of the status quo that I had this issue. I think the thing that was hardest for me is that when you grow up, I'm so glad my mom got me in counseling. And I'm so glad I was trauma informed and understood what was happening and didn't have a lot of confusion. But the other side of that is that it just becomes your norm. And so there was a little part of me that thought I had no hope to overcome it. Even though they were telling me I did, and even though I did see some improvement along the way, I very much was labeled
Right.
as having this issue. And even though the people around me didn't label me, I labeled me. And so I didn't have the normal, why am I different? Why are just normal relationships difficult for me? It was, I went into relationships expecting them to be difficult. And so I'm a little bit of a different case because of what happened.
How informed you were.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. And I would love to highlight the fact that these are not permanent boxes. And it can seem that way when you take a quiz. Am I anxious? Am I avoidant? Am I secure? What box am I going to be put in? What we all need to know is, like, we can move towards security. We can develop those relationships. We can grow into ourselves. It's going to, like we said, take work, vulnerability. It's going to be uncomfortable. We're going to have to open it up. But it is possible to move that meter towards security. And I think, that's why you're sharing your story, is to let people know that you're not in that box.
Exactly. And I believe, and I know there's all sorts of statistics out there, that 60% of the population has secure attachment and 40% is insecure. I think more people have issues than is reported.
I can agree with that.
I think I think almost everyone is affected by it. Even if it's not you, one of your closest relationships, your spouse, your children, your parents, probably in that mix, someone has some sort of attachment issue. And so I believe that almost everyone is affected by this. And I think it's so important to know that change is possible and that healing is possible. And as we all get healthier, then the next generation will naturally have more secure attachment. And so I'm very passionate about getting awareness out there and awareness of the problem, because so many people aren't even aware of the problem, and then also offer hope for change and for solution.
Yeah. I also have a lot of hope for the next generation because we are talking about attachment styles more. We are talking about parenting more and feeling secure. And I think it brings a lot of, light to people who are struggling in their relationships just to know that, like, you're doing the best that you can with what you have. And
Exactly. Yep.
you develop these coping skills to survive as a child. And that got you through, but now that you're an adult, they're maladaptive and they're not serving you anymore. And so, how can we take what you have learned and shift it into a more healthy perspective so you can grow and feel more deeply?
I love that you said shift because it's very likely that even avoidance, anxious, disorganized, whatever the case may be, you have some bonding
Mm-hmm.
that's healthy and good.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not the overreaching theme in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's another thing that needs to be spoken about because when I was going through my process, I thought, I'm unhealthy and I need to get over here
Mm-hmm.
into the healthy. I didn't realize it was a shift, that it was you have some things that are healthy and a lot of things that are unhealthy. And we want to get you over to a lot of things that are healthy. And there'll probably still be a few things that are unhealthy that you can continue to work on.
Right.
And that just removes so much pressure.
Pressure. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's because it sounds like when you're going through therapy, it's a light switch, that there's an unhealthy off button and then there's a healthy on button. And it's really
Abnormal
not.
versus normal.
Exactly.
And that's not how humans function. No.
It's really not like that. You have something to build upon.
Mm-hmm.
Most likely there is some remnant of a good relationship or a good experience that you can build upon.
Mm-hmm.
You're not completely ignorant to secure attachment.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not your default. It's not your norm.
Right.
And I think we need to talk about that more.
Right. And even if someone is considered secure and had their needs met, they're still going to make mistakes. They're still going to do unhealthy behaviors. They're still going to have unhealthy coping skills because we're all human and we all are just trying to figure out what we're trying to do to be happy and to be successful. And that looks different for everyone, and that's okay.
Yep.
But let's try to make the best with what we have and learn new skills. And I have a teacher who's talks a lot about like scaffolding. And so we start like lower and maybe we're really struggling, but then we take one foot out and we're getting a little bit closer and a little bit closer. And it's on a spectrum and there's no perfect happy ending. We just are trying to become aware, seek therapy, seek help, talk about these things, and take away that stigma and just know like it's okay to be in your journey wherever you're at.
Yes.
There is hope.
Yes. And you've made it this far.
Exactly.
I mean, you've made it this far. You've had some sort of trauma that could have a ton of different outcomes and effects, and you've made it this far. Even if you're dealing with something, you could have had 10 more issues. So I think when counseling or psychology first started to become mainstream, I always say with Dr. Phil, it's like that's when it became more.
That's the beginning.
That was the beginning of it being more mainstream. It was all about kind of like AA. You can't get better unless you admit you're an alcoholic. So it was all about diagnosis. And it was all about you have this problem. And I don't think we've evolved as a society enough yet that it's, yes, you do have to admit that you have a problem, but that is the first tiny step in a million other steps. It's not the end all be all. It's not your label. It's not your stigma that you're going to have for the rest of your life. It's a starting point to move from. And I just wish that there would be a little bit more talk about that. And some things are supposedly not fixable. And so I understand the need for a diagnosis.
Right.
But the more I work on myself, I think more things are fixable than we even know yet.
100%. 100%. And from a therapist perspective, we do have, our chronic disorders, but a lot of them are temporary. They are episodic. They don't last forever. And so getting help and support and working through that, people can see major, major changes. And a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, it's not fixed. Relationships cause these problems, but relationships can heal these problems. And that's
Yes.
probably the goodest, bestest news I can share with
Yes.
everyone today is that
Yeah.
developing healthy relationships and marriages and bonding with your babies and having, new beginnings gives so much hope for the future.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, I'm totally with you on that.
And I love what you said about that, because for me, it was mainly relationships that were a huge factor of a recovery for me.
Mhm.
Reconnecting with my father
Mhm.
and then building those lasting adult friendships and
Mhm.
community really was the turning point.
Mhm.
I had been in therapy my entire life. I had practiced tools and gotten knowledge, but it was really the relationships that I was able to engage in because of the therapy and
Right.
knowledge and books.
Yes.
But it was really the relationships that made me feel like I could open up, made
Right.
me feel like I needed intimacy, made me feel like I needed connection and community with people. So it's almost a catch-22. You need relationships to heal, but then you might not pick the best relationships. So I always say that in the beginning, you can't go by your feelings. In the beginning, you have to choose wiser relationships.
Mhm.
And that's so counterintuitive.
It is because naturally we go towards what's familiar.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why we keep ending up in these same patterns. And it leaves us, you've heard the saying, like, I broke up with this person and now I'm dating the same person just in a different
In
body,
a
right?
different body. Yeah.
And that is so difficult for people to put themselves out there, use the tools that they've learned in therapy, and try dating different people and
Mhm.
saying, okay, this is different because I want a different outcome.
Exactly. And I think another thing we don't talk about it a lot, and I don't know if this is scientific, you'll have to tell me, but I am of the belief that avoidance and disorganized get together a lot. And they're kryptonite to each other. I used to think it was avoidance and anxious, but now that I understand disorganized better, it's really avoidance and disorganized that get together,
Interesting.
because avoidance have impenetrable internal walls, and the disorganized attachment style isn't afraid to go past people's boundaries. I always say they're like a little bit more aggressive. They just push past boundaries and will make you give them attention, will make you love them, and will make you, you know,
Get
they'll keep not,
uncomfortable.
yeah,
Yeah.
they'll keep knocking at the door until you open it. And for the avoidant that's somewhat self-aware, it's refreshing at first.
Mhm.
It's like,
Mhm.
oh wow, they pushed, they didn't take
They're
no for an
pursuing me.
answer.
Yeah.
They're pursuing me, and it's refreshing at first. But then the disorganized also fears intimacy,
Mhm.
and then that's also an attracting feature, because you understand that about each other,
Mhm.
but it's not, you don't help each other grow,
No, not at
y-
all. No.
and so I do think, and I'll see it sometimes in my friends, and I'll just be like, there's that combo.
Mhm.
It's an intense combo, I think.
It
And
is very intense.
yes, I don't know
Yeah.
if you see that in your practice, but
No, definitely. Definitely. And I always talk about like the avoidant and anxious tango, the push pull,
mhm,
that pursuer distancer combination that we see so often. And, hearing you talk about disorganized, it makes perfect sense because there is that safety deep down from an anxious person to not want to fully be vulnerable. And that's not
mhm,
talked about enough either because on
mm-mm,
the surface, it's like, oh, you're anxious and you pursue people and you really want connections and you're just kind of really putting yourself out there all the time. But deep down, you don't really want to know what is going on inside.
yeah,
And so that, avoidant person just seems so attractive because they are not going to push you to that
mhm,
uncomfortable place. Um,
yeah,
like I said, we typically go towards relationships that are familiar. And if we
mhm,
had the lack thereof from our caregivers, that's all we know. And so we're going to
yep,
go out into the world seeking those relationships that make us feel the same, which a lot of times feels really bad.
yes, yep,
Yeah.
yep.
Yeah. And so, just to wrap things up, I think this shed a lot of light on some of the stigmas that come along with these labels, and also how much hope there is for change as we grow into our relationships and grow into a relationship with ourselves. And
Yeah,
that is
that's
a
huge.
huge, huge part of this. And going to counseling and building awareness and reading books about this stuff is just step one. We're just
Yep.
kind of building that foundation. And step two really kind of is on us to go out there and utilize these tools and get uncomfortable. And I think
Mhm.
that's really difficult for a lot of people when they go to therapy. They are just waiting to see some drastic changes happen. But really, that comes down to going out into the world and trying something different.
And it
Definitely.
can be scary at first, but one of my biggest mentors said, treat yourself with gentle curiosity. And so you do have to make yourself uncomfortable, but you can do it in a way where you're gentle with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes that is lost as well,
Mm-hmm.
because we think of working out and the only way to get, results
Kind.
is if you're
Yeah.
sweating and like in pain the next day. And it's inner healing can be that way, but it doesn't have to be that way every single time.
Mm-hmm.
You can go outside of your comfort zone and still be gentle with yourself, not beat yourself up
Mm-hmm.
for feeling uncomfortable or beat yourself up for maybe not handling it the right way.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a combination of gentleness and getting yourself out of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
And we really have to be gentle with ourselves through the
Yes.
inner healing process, because
Yes.
it does not help you to beat yourself up.
You
Or
can't hate yourself into becoming better.
yes.
It's
Yes.
all about loving yourself through it, having that self compassion. That is so big. And having people around you in a support system you can be vulnerable with and they can support you through it because it's going to be
Yes.
difficult.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. And there's a lot of confusion. So that's the main reason why I felt led to write the book, is because I read a lot of clinical
Mm-hmm.
information about attachment, but I never really heard someone's story of getting on the other side of it,
Practicality of it.
the
Yeah.
practicality of it. And I will say that I think what only a person will tell you is that there is a lot of confusion.
Mm-hmm.
It's you think you're doing the right thing, and then sometimes you don't think you're doing the right thing, and then sometimes you're just fine. But there's just a lot of confusion, and you have to become uber self-aware
Mm-hmm.
and uber aware of your surroundings.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, again, we don't talk enough about that. Is, it's all about me. I can only control what I do, which is true, but you can control the environments that you're in.
Mm-hmm.
And like we were saying earlier, I would probably naturally still be drawn to somebody who's dealing with a disorganized attachment style. That's never gonna serve me into health.
Yeah.
And it takes, not putting myself in that situation consciously,
Mm-hmm.
as well as managing my emotions and responses. So it's a combination of all of it. And then it gets super easy, because sometimes I talk to people and they're like, aren't you exhausted? And it's like, oh no, then you just get into autopilot. Then you're just able to quickly recognize things, and you're
Mm-hmm.
able to quickly make decisions without having to, shed tears and call your counselor every single time. You begin to develop that screen of,
Because we are resilient.
yes, we
Yeah.
are resilient.
We are resilient and we learn and we have neuroplasticity and we
Yes.
can form new connections in our brain and things can actually start progressing. And I think that's the beauty of everything we're talking about is
Mm-hmm.
change is possible. New relationships and connection is possible for all of
100%.
us. Yeah, that's super exciting.
I
And
love
thank
it.
you so much for being so vulnerable and sharing your story.
Thank
And
you for
so,
having me on.
oh my gosh, yeah, no, this has been so great. And I think destigmatizing what this means is just so, so, so important. And knowing this is a journey forever. There is no
Mhm.
happy place, ending, sunset. That's that's not real. That's not what
Mhm.
therapy is. And so we're all just trying to be better than we were yesterday. And that's
Yeah.
going to look different for everybody. And so,
So good.
yeah.
That's
Yeah.
so good.
Thank you
That's
so
so
much,
good.
Rita. Well,
Thank you so much.
tell us a little bit more about your book and where we can find that.
Sure. So it's in editing right now. It's not available just yet. The title is Canyons and Fireworks. And I do have a website, canyonsandfireworks.com, where you can see all of my social media handles. I also blog and stay up to date on the book release.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And all of the
Thank
links
you.
are going to be in the description below. And so thank you so much, Rita.
Thank you. I really appreciate you.
Thank you. We'll see you guys next time.
Thanks so much for spending some time with us here on A Safe Place to Land. Could you do me a favor really quick? Could you leave us a review wherever you are listening to this and subscribe so that you never have to miss an episode whenever we drop it? If at any point in time you're like, man, it would be so cool to work with the team at Sunshine City Counseling, you can always find us at sunshinecitycounseling.com. We serve the state of Florida, and we are located in the downtown community of St. Petersburg, Florida. If you are in or around the Portland, Maine area, you can find us at easternshorecounseling.co. We really believe that every single person is deserving of excellent mental health care. You are not a problem to be solved or fixed. You are a person to be served. We are here for you, so don't hesitate to reach out. Until next time, we'll see you guys later. Bye.